The Obaid family had been talking about this trip for months, and now the day had finally come. They were heading to the famous Betrayal resort in Luanda, a place everyone in the city dreamed of visiting. From the moment the family gathered at the gate, the air was filled with noise and excitement. Cousins laughed loudly, uncles compared their expensive watches, and the aunties showed off brand new handbags bought just for the vacation. Suitcases lined the floor, shiny and branded, each one a symbol of pride. It felt less like a family holiday and more like a competition. Who could look the richest, who could impress the most? Phones were out everywhere, snapping photos and recording videos to post online. People must see how we travel, one cousin boasted as he adjusted his sunglasses. Children ran around, holding snacks and wearing matching outfits their mothers had carefully chosen. Even the older relatives carried themselves with pride, as if stepping into the resort would prove their importance. The entire journey was filled with chatter about the spa, the food, the private pools, and the ocean view. To everyone, this was more than a vacation. It was a chance to show the world their status. Mirembe walked quietly behind the others, her small suitcase rolling unevenly on the ground. Unlike her cousin's shining luggage sets, hers was an old bag her neighbor had given her. A little faded but still strong. She didn't mind. What mattered to her was that she had been included in the trip at all. Her heart carried a hopeful smile, even if her face looked shy. She kept telling herself that maybe, just maybe, this holiday would change things, that her relatives would finally see her as part of them, not just the quiet niece who always stayed in the background. She had spent the night before carefully folding the few clothes she owned, choosing her best dress, and braiding her hair neatly. She wanted to look presentable, to fit in. When she saw her cousins with their designer outfits and glittering shoes, a small sting touched her heart, but she quickly brushed it away. Gratitude, she reminded herself. She was thankful to even be standing here, going to a place she had only ever seen in magazines. On the bus ride to the resort, she listened more than she spoke. Her family's voices filled the air with jokes, arguments, and laughter. She leaned against the window, watching the fields and towns pass by, whispering silent prayers that this trip would bring her closer to them. She imagined herself sitting with her cousins at dinner, laughing freely, or walking with her aunts by the beach, finally included in their circle. Though she felt the weight of being different, she held on to hope like a lifeline. Maybe the ocean waves would wash away the walls between her and her family. Maybe the beautiful resort would create memories where she didn't feel left out. In her heart, she believed this trip could be her chance to belong. The moment they arrived at Betrayal Resort, the staff welcomed the Obaid family with warm smiles and cool drinks. The lobby sparkled with glass chandeliers, polished floors, and the soft sound of ocean waves drifting through the open windows. Everyone marveled at the beauty of the place, taking pictures and showing off their excitement. Soon, the manager handed over the keys to the luxury suites, and the family began choosing their rooms. The cousins argued playfully over who would get the rooms with ocean views, while the uncles demanded the biggest suites. Mirembe stood quietly at the back, waiting for her turn, clutching her little bag. She wasn't expecting anything fancy, but she hoped for a simple bed where she could rest after the long journey. Just as she stepped forward, her aunt turned sharply toward her, her voice cutting through the laughter. "You," she said with a cruel smile, "you can sleep in the kitchen. That's where you belong." For a moment the entire group froze, then burst into laughter. Some cousins covered their mouths, pretending to hide their giggles, while others laughed openly, pointing at her. Each laugh felt like a knife stabbing her dignity. Mirembe's face grew hot, but she quickly lowered her head, forcing a weak smile as if it didn't matter. Her chest ached, her eyes stung, but she swallowed her tears, refusing to let them see her break. She picked up her bag and nodded quietly, as though it was normal, as though sleeping in a kitchen was fine for her. Inside, her heart screamed with pain. She wondered why her own family treated her like a servant, like someone undeserving of even the smallest kindness. As they celebrated their suites, showing off the luxury around them, Mirembe walked silently toward the staff quarters, her spirit bruised but her pride still holding on. That night, while the rest of the Obaid family unpacked in their spacious suites, Mirembe was led to a small corner in the staff quarters. The room smelled faintly of cooking oil and detergent, and the sound of clattering dishes echoed from the kitchen nearby. A worker placed a thin mat on the floor for her. It wasn't even a proper bed, just a rough surface where she could stretch out her tired body. She thanked them softly, even though her voice trembled. As she lay down staring up at the ceiling, she could hear faint laughter from the luxury rooms above. The cousins were probably trying on their clothes, posing for pictures in the giant mirrors, and enjoying the fresh flowers placed in their suites. She imagined the wide beds covered in white sheets, the cool air conditioning, and the view of the moonlit ocean. Meanwhile, she curled on her mat, hugging her bag like a pillow, trying not to cry too loudly. Her heart felt heavy, weighed down by the cruelty of her own family. She whispered to herself, "Why is it always me?" She thought of strangers who had shown her kindness before. A shopkeeper who once gave her free bread when she was hungry. A neighbor who offered her clothes without asking for anything in return. Why was it that people who shared her blood could wound her deeper than anyone else? Sleep would not come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard echoes of their laughter when her aunt said, "You belong in the kitchen." It replayed in her mind like a cruel song. She turned on her side, biting her lip to keep the tears in. The night dragged on slowly. Between the clinking sounds from the kitchen and the cold floor beneath her, she felt lonelier than ever. Yet somewhere deep inside, a small voice told her to hold on, that her story wouldn't always be like this. She didn't know it yet, but the same place where she had been humiliated would soon become the stage of her greatest honor. Before the rest of the family even woke up, Mirembe slipped quietly out of the staff quarters. The air was cool, carrying the salty scent of the ocean, and the first rays of sunlight painted the sky in soft orange and pink. She walked barefoot along the sandy path that led to the beach, each step slow and heavy, as though she was carrying the weight of the night on her shoulders. When she reached the shoreline, the sight took her breath away. The sea stretched endlessly before her, the waves rolling gently as if whispering secrets only the ocean knew. She stood there for a long moment, letting the breeze brush against her face, closing her eyes to breathe it in. The calm of the morning felt like a gift, wrapping around her wounded heart, offering comfort in ways her family never did. Still, behind her quiet smile, her eyes held a pain she couldn't hide. She thought of how her cousins were probably still asleep in their soft beds, wrapped in warmth, while she had spent the night curled on a mat, staring at the ceiling. She wondered if they even realized how cruel their laughter had been, or if they cared at all. Mirembe bent down and picked up a seashell, holding it gently in her palm. It was chipped on one side but still beautiful, shining in the morning light. She whispered to herself, "Maybe I'm like this shell, flawed but still worth something." She walked further, letting the cool waves touch her feet. Each step reminded her that she was alive, that she still had hope buried somewhere inside her. And though her heart ached, she found a strange strength in the silence of the sea. It felt as if the ocean was listening, washing away some of her sorrow. She didn't know what awaited her that day, but in that quiet sunrise, she promised herself not to let their cruelty define her. The man didn't walk away. Instead, he slowed his steps to match hers as they continued along the beach. His voice remained calm, almost fatherly. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said softly. "Sometimes it helps to share what's really in your heart." Mirembe kept her eyes on the waves, fighting back the storm inside her. For a moment, she wanted to stay silent, to keep her pain hidden the way she always did. But something about his kindness felt safe. It wasn't the kind of pitying glance she often received. It was genuine concern. She took a deep breath and finally spoke, her words trembling. "They made me sleep in the kitchen," she admitted quietly. "My own family. They laughed about it, as if I wasn't even human." She let out a small broken laugh, hoping to make it sound like a joke, but the sound carried more sadness than humor. Her fingers tightened around the seashell she had picked earlier, as though holding onto it gave her strength. She shrugged lightly, pretending it was no big deal. "I guess that's just where I belong to them," she said, forcing a smile. But her voice betrayed her, cracking in the middle. The man stopped walking and looked at her carefully. His face grew serious, the warmth in his eyes now mixed with something else. Anger, but not at her. Anger at the cruelty she had endured. "The kitchen," he repeated slowly, his tone heavy. Mirembe nodded quickly, embarrassed that she had said too much. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to laugh again. "It's silly, isn't it? I shouldn't let it bother me." But the man didn't laugh. His jaw tightened, and his silence spoke louder than any words. In that moment, Mirembe realized he wasn't just listening. He was carrying her pain with her. And though she didn't know who he really was, something in his serious gaze told her that her story had touched a place deep inside his heart. That evening, the Obaid family gathered in the grand dining hall of the resort. The chandeliers glowed softly above the long tables, and the sound of clinking glasses mixed with laughter and chatter. Everyone was dressed in their finest clothes, eager to enjoy the luxury they had been boasting about since the trip began. Plates of rich food were carried out, and the family members busied themselves taking pictures for social media, showing off the elegance around them. Mirembe sat quietly at the far end of the table, trying to stay invisible. She picked at her food while her cousins laughed loudly, exchanging stories and teasing one another. Her aunt, the same one who had told her to sleep in the kitchen, whispered something that made the others laugh again, and Mirembe lowered her gaze, wishing she could disappear. Suddenly, the doors of the dining hall opened, and the atmosphere shifted. A group of staff members entered first, their posture straight and respectful. Behind them walked the same man Mirembe had met on the beach, the one with the gentle eyes and linen shirt. Only now, he didn't look like just another guest. His presence commanded attention. The manager's voice rang out clearly, silencing the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Kamari, the owner of Bari Pearl Resort." The announcement struck the room like lightning. Forks clattered against plates and gasps filled the air. The cousins who had mocked Mirembe earlier exchanged shocked glances, their eyes wide. Even the aunt who had spoken so cruelly stiffened in her seat, her fake smile frozen. Mirembe's own heart pounded as she stared at him. She could hardly believe it. The kind stranger she had poured her heart out to that morning was the billionaire owner of the resort. He walked with quiet confidence, greeting the staff warmly, but his eyes searched the room until they landed on her. For the first time that evening, Mirembe felt every gaze in the hall shift toward her, though no one. The entire dining hall seemed to pause in disbelief. Mirembe's relatives sat frozen, their mouths slightly open, their eyes darting between the man in the fine linen shirt and the niece they had pushed aside. Just that morning they had mocked her, laughed at her misery, and forced her to sleep in the kitchen. Yet here she was, the quiet girl they treated like a shadow, connected to the most important man in the building. The cousins who had laughed the loudest now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They remembered how they had called her kitchen girl, how they had pointed and giggled when her aunt ordered her away. Now their laughter felt heavy in their throats, threatening to choke them. The same uncle who had brushed her aside to secure his suite stared at Mr. Kamari with wide eyes, his hand trembling slightly as he lifted his glass. "What is happening?" one cousin whispered, his voice barely audible. Did she know him already? Another quickly shook her head, her eyes locked on Mirembe. "No. But look, he's looking at her." And indeed he was. Mr. Kamari's eyes softened as they fell on Mirembe, his expression warm but steady. It was the kind of look that could not be ignored. The family noticed it instantly, and panic quietly spread among them. Their kitchen girl had spent her morning walking the beach with the resort's billionaire owner, talking and even laughing with him. The aunt who had delivered the cruel command earlier pressed her lips together tightly. Her face grew pale, and she shifted in her chair as though trying to escape the weight of her own words. For the first time, silence fell over the family. The pride and arrogance that had filled the room moments ago were gone, replaced with unease. Mirembe, however, sat still, her heart racing. She could feel every pair of eyes on her, but for once she wasn't shrinking under their gaze. Something deep inside told her that the story was no longer in their hands. It was shifting in hers. The dining hall turned heavy with silence, as if the chandeliers themselves had dimmed. Mirembe's relatives sat frozen, their faces stiff with shock. The same man they had seen walking quietly along the beach, the man they hadn't even bothered to greet, was not just another guest. He was Kamari, the billionaire owner of Bari Pearl Resort. Their eyes shifted quickly between him and Mirembe. The cousins who had laughed the hardest that morning now fidgeted in their seats, their laughter stuck like a lump in their throats. They remembered how she had dragged her little bag to the kitchen quarters while they paraded proudly into their suites. They had called her kitchen girl, mocking her as though she was beneath them. And now that same kitchen girl had spent the morning walking, talking, and even laughing with the man who owned everything around them. One cousin whispered nervously, "Is this real? She knows him." Another bit her lip, glancing at their aunt, the very woman who had pushed Mirembe aside. That aunt's face had lost all its color. She tried to smile, but it came out stiff and uneasy. Her cruel words from earlier, "That's where you belong," echoed back in her mind like a curse she wished she could erase. The uncles who had demanded the best sweets now bowed their heads slightly, as if trying to shrink in their chairs. None of them had imagined that the quiet girl they dismissed could hold the attention of a man with such power. Meanwhile, Mirembe sat silently, her hands folded in her lap. She could feel every pair of eyes burning into her, but she didn't squirm or lower her head this time. Instead, she lifted her chin just a little, not in pride but in quiet strength. For once she didn't feel small. The family's confusion grew thicker with every passing second. They didn't know what shocked them more, that the stranger they ignored was the owner of the resort, or that the girl they had pushed into the shadows was now standing in a light bright. All eyes followed Kamari as he walked through the dining hall. He didn't glance at the uncles or acknowledge the cousins who quickly straightened in their seats, hoping for his attention. He didn't even pause for the aunt who had already forced a nervous smile onto her face. Instead, he went straight to Mirembe, his step steady, his presence commanding the entire room. "Mirembe," he said warmly, his voice clear enough for everyone to hear. "I'd like you to join me for breakfast." He pulled out a chair at the head table, the very place reserved for honor, where only the most important sat. For a second Mirembe froze, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Her eyes widened, her lips parted slightly in shock. She glanced around the room, half expecting someone to laugh and tell her it was a mistake. But it was no mistake. Kamari's hand was steady, and his eyes were kind, waiting only for her. Gasps rippled across the table. The cousins leaned forward, whispering furiously among themselves. The aunt who had sent her to the kitchen gripped her napkin so tightly her knuckles turned white. Pride and arrogance melted into shame as they realized the tables had turned. Slowly Mirembe stood up. Her legs trembled, but she forced herself to walk forward. And the moment she sat in that chair, the staff rushed to her side. Plates of steaming food, fresh fruits and crystal glasses of juice appeared in front of her. One attendant even adjusted her chair with gentle care, as though she were royalty. The family stared in disbelief as Mirembe was served like a queen. The girl they had laughed at, the one they had thrown into the shadows, was now the center of honor. Mirembe lowered her gaze, her lips forming a soft smile. She didn't gloat, she didn't throw their cruelty back at them. Her quiet dignity spoke louder than any revenge ever could. In that moment the entire room understood. The one they had tried to bury had risen higher than all of them, lifted by the very man who. The next morning, the Obaid family gathered in the lobby, buzzing with excitement. They were preparing for a group excursion to another island, already bragging about the yacht ride and the pictures they would post online. Laughter and chatter filled the air as they adjusted their sunglasses and compared outfits, eager to show off once again. Mirembe stood quietly in the corner, clutching her small bag, preparing herself to be ignored as usual. Then Kamari entered. The noise in the lobby faded instantly. His calm presence commanded silence without him saying a word. He walked past the cousins and uncles who tried to greet him, his eyes fixed only on Mirembe. "Are you ready?" he asked her gently, his smile breaking through the tension in the room. Before she could respond, the manager announced in a respectful tone, "Mr. Kamari has arranged a private jet for himself and Miss Mirembe." The family froze. "Private jet?" One cousin whispered in disbelief, his voice trembling. Another gripped her designer bag tightly, as though it could hide the sting of jealousy on her face. Kamari turned to Mirembe, his voice kind but firm. "You deserve better than kitchen floors," he said softly, words meant for her but loud enough for everyone to hear. He extended his hand, and she took it with hesitant grace. When they arrived at the runway, a sleek white jet gleamed under the sun. Staff bowed respectfully as Kamari guided Mirembe up the stairs. She stepped inside, her heart racing at the sight of the plush leather seats, golden details and wide windows that looked out over the sky. She had never even dreamed of such luxury. Back in the lobby, the Obaid family stood in silence, their pride crumbling. The same girl they had ordered to sleep on a kitchen mat was now boarding a first-class jet with the billionaire owner of the resort. They could only watch as the doors closed behind her, the sound of the engines rising like a declaration that the tables had completely turned. The Obaid family stood in the lobby long after the jet had taken off, their faces tight with shame. No one dared to speak loudly anymore. The cousins who once laughed at Mirembe now kept their eyes low, whispering nervously among themselves. Every insult they had thrown at her seemed to come back and strike them harder than ever. The words "kitchen girl" echoed in their minds like poison, a reminder of the cruelty they had so proudly displayed. One cousin tried to laugh it off, but the sound died in his throat when he saw the others glaring at him. There was nothing funny left. Another cousin muttered, "How could we have known?" But even that excuse felt weak. They all knew it wasn't about knowing. It was about the way they had treated her, blood of their blood, with no care for her dignity. The aunt who had given the cruel command sat stiff in her chair, her lips pressed so tightly they had lost their color. She replayed the moment she sneered. "That's where you belong." And it burned inside her like fire. She wished she could swallow her words, erase them, pretend they had never been spoken, but it was too late. The entire family had witnessed her cruelty, and now the world seemed ready to witness her shame. The uncles who had once bragged loudly about their sweets and wealth, now sat silent, shifting uncomfortably. They realized that no matter how much money they flaunted, none of them held the respect or power that Mirembe had been given in just one moment of kindness from Kamari. Every face carried guilt, regret, and fear. The pride that had filled them when the trip began was gone, replaced by an uneasy silence. For the first time they were forced to see themselves clearly, not as the powerful family they pretended to be, but as the people who had laughed at a girl who deserved far better than their cruelty. High above the clouds, Mirembe sat quietly in the private jet, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The leather seat felt softer than anything she had ever touched, but it wasn't the luxury that filled her heart, it was the dignity. She didn't need to post pictures or flaunt her new place of honor. She didn't need to shout, "Look at me now." Her silence, her calm presence, spoke louder than any words ever could. As the plane glided smoothly through the sky, Kamari glanced at her with a smile, proud of the grace she carried. Most people, he thought, would have thrown their victory in the faces of those who had humiliated them. But not Mirembe. She didn't gloat, she didn't boast. She simply sat with quiet strength, her small smile holding more power than revenge. Back at the resort, her family still whispered nervously, replaying every cruel word they had said. They expected her to come back with sharp words, to make them feel the pain they had given her. Instead, Mirembe returned with gentleness. She greeted them politely, sat at the table with grace, and spoke only when necessary. That calmness, that refusal to be dragged down to their level, pierced them more deeply than anger ever could. Her cousins avoided her gaze, their pride crumbling under the weight of her composure. Her aunt, the one who had ordered her to the kitchen, found herself unable to lift her head. Every time she tried to smirk, Mirembe's quiet smile reminded her of her cruelty. Mirembe realized something powerful. True strength wasn't about shouting or proving anyone wrong. It was about standing tall with dignity, even when others tried to bury you. And in that moment she discovered her quiet power, a power no insult, no laughter, and no humiliation could ever take away. She had risen above them all, not with revenge but with grace. The dining hall was silent when Kamari finally spoke. His voice was calm but every word carried weight. He looked at the Obeid family, his eyes steady, and said, "The way you treat the least among you reveals who you really are." His words landed heavily, cutting through their pride like sharp arrows. No one dared to laugh or roll their eyes. The same mouths that once sneered at Mirembe now stayed shut. The cousins shifted uncomfortably in their seats, staring at their plates as if the food could hide them. The uncle cleared his throat, trying to find an excuse, but no words came. And Mirembe's aunt, who had mocked her the most, suddenly looked smaller, her face pale. Every insult she had thrown at her niece now echoed in the room, bouncing back like a mirror showing her true reflection. Kamari's gaze softened when it rested on Mirembe, but his voice stayed firm as he turned back to the family. "You thought she was weak because she had less. But in reality, she has shown more strength and grace than all of you combined." His words struck deeper than anger ever could, because they carried truth. Mirembe sat quietly, not gloating, not seeking revenge. Her calm presence made their shame even heavier. They realized the wealth they flaunted meant nothing compared to the dignity they had lost. Their expensive clothes, their designer luggage, their loud pride, none of it could cover the ugliness of how they had treated one of their own. The family exchanged uneasy glances, their laughter from the first day now haunting them. In that moment they understood. Respect was not measured by status or riches but by kindness, and they had failed that test miserably. Kamari's words would stay with them long after the trip ended, a painful reminder of the lesson they had been forced to learn the hard way. Soon, the story of Murembe began to spread like wildfire. At first, it was just whispers in the resort, guests asking each other if they had heard about the quiet girl who was forced to sleep in the kitchen. But then came the twist everyone couldn't stop talking about. That same girl was seen flying first class, side by side with Kamari, the billionaire owner of Bari Pearl Resort. By the time the family returned home, the story had already traveled across Luanda and beyond. People shared it in markets, offices, schools, and on every social platform. Strangers who had never met Murembe spoke of her with admiration. Imagine, they said. They tried to shame her, but destiny lifted her higher than all of them. Murembe became more than just a girl in a sad story. She became a symbol of resilience. Her grace in the face of humiliation inspired countless others who had ever been pushed aside, mocked, or made to feel small. To many, she was living proof that rejection doesn't define you. It can be the very path that carries you into your true destiny. Her name echoed far beyond her family's pride or cruelty. To the world, she was the girl who had turned pain into power, who rose without bitterness, and who showed that sometimes, the stone others throw away is the one destiny uses to build a palace.